Hello everyone. Some of you may know me, but for those of you who don't, I'm Chris Longmuir and I'm a writer. I write mainly crime thrillers and historical murder mysteries. But that wasn't what I meant to be in the beginning. The very first book I wrote was a family saga. I was going to be the new Catherine Cookson. Remember her? Yeah. Well, I wrote this book, A Salt Splashed Cradle. I've got it here. That's it. Now, it's set in the 1830s in a very thinly disguised Ferry Denham Montrose. So I took a whole year to write that book, and then it was being considered by a publisher. And that was the year sagas went out of fashion, with the publishers anyway, maybe not with the reading public, but then what do publishers know? So that was a kind of a non-starter. But before that, I'd been writing a lot of short stories and articles. I'd been writing for probably about 20 years before I started to write books. And as I say, Salt Splash Cradle was the very first one I wrote. So when Salt Splash Cradle was a non-starter, I turned my mind to crime thrillers. So I suppose the fact that Salt Splash Cradle wasn't taken was why I turned to a life of crime. Anyway, the first one I wrote was a historical murder mystery. That one went the rounds and wasn't published. Then I thought, well, that's not working, so I turned to contemporary crime thrillers. So I wrote Night Watcher, and I wrote Dead Wood, although when I wrote it, it was called The Screaming Woods. Now, I suppose I'd been writing novels for about 8 years before I actually hit publication. And the reason I hit publication was because I won the Dundee International Book Prize. So I became an overnight success after writing novels for 8 years and articles and short stories for the previous 20 years. It takes a long time to be an overnight success. So I carried on from there, and I published the first in the Dundee Crime series, Night Watcher. I then published, well, Deadwood was already published, so I couldn't publish that because it was already there, and Missing Believed Dead. So that was my Dundee Crime series. Let me see, where are they? Right. That was book 1 in the Dundee Crime series, Night Watcher. Now, Night Watcher is a story of obsession and revenge. There are 2 stalkers in this one. There's Julie, who's seeking revenge on the woman who stole her husband. Her husband left her and ultimately killed himself, at least that's what it looked like, and Julie blames this woman, Nicole. But this other stalker, who's quite a disturbed individual, also has Nicole in his sights. So the book carries on with the 2 of them stalking Nicole, and Nicole ends up dead. But the problem is, who killed her? And that is basically the story of Night Watcher. Now, my crime thrillers, I kind of try to write them like an action thriller, a crime thriller, a psychological crime thriller. But at the same time, I also build in a mystery into that. Something like the Agatha Christie puzzle, where basically the clues are all there and you can actually, if you're clever enough, find out who the killer is before I tell you who the killer is. Not many people do find it out early, although one guy stopped me on the high street after I'd written my 3rd Dundee Crime series book and said, I was halfway through that book and I figured out who did it. And I said, well, you're allowed to do that. I said, because the clues are all there. And I said, congratulations on figuring it out. So that was that. Anyway, Deadwood was the second one in the series, although the first one that was published, which is a bit confusing for people, when the second book's published before the first book. But this is Deadwood, Now, Deadwood again has a kind of a revenge theme, but it also has a serial killer theme. Now, we have a killer in here who has a tree fetish, and he leaves all his victims in Templeton Woods. You know, that's where the historic murders took place, but these are not the historic murders. These are completely new murders by this serial killer. But he chooses one of his victims very unwisely, because one of his victims is the daughter of a gangster, the Mr. Big of Dundee. And he wants to take revenge on the killer. So we have both the police and the gangster hunting for the serial killer. So who's going to find him first? And if the gangster finds him first, what's he going to do to him? You'll have to read the book to find out. Anyway, the third book in the series, Missing Believed Dead. Now this one, the suspects are a whole family. Now, the daughter of this family went missing about 5 years prior to the book's date, you know, when the book was set. And someone is targeting online predators, luring them to Dundee and killing them. So the thing is, it's one of the members of this family, but which one? And there's also the question of, has this missing daughter come back and is wreaking her revenge? You'll have to read that one to find out as well. Anyway, that's my Dundee crime series. They're quite popular, and they're all contemporary, set in the present day. Well, more or less the present day, if you know what I mean. Maybe not Police Scotland, but prior to Police Scotland, when Dundee City Police were a police force. Some people think they're the Bill Murphy series, but it's not the Bill Murphy series. Bill Murphy is the main police character in the Dundee crime series. But Bill is not the main character, he's the main police character. The main character is a different person in each book. In Night Watcher, it's Julie, who is stalking Nicole. In Deadwood, it's Cara, who is a young single mother who is abducted by the serial killer but manages to escape. And of course she's running from the gangster because her Bidean, you know what a Bidean is? Her partner has left her in the lurch and taken all her money. So she's had to go onto the streets she doesn't normally do this, but she has to go onto the streets to find some money to pay off the guys who are chasing him for the money for his drugs. So in the book, she spends her time running from the gangsters and also running from the serial killer. And, you know, you have to read the book to find out what happens to her. Missing Believed Dead, as I said, that the whole family is the main character. But Bill Murphy is the detective, and people seem to like Bill Murphy. Bill Murphy's a bit of a loser. You know, he's a bit of a sado, really. I think the women who read it want to mother him. One of my readers wants to find him a nice wife, which is never going to happen. But the men like him as well. I'm not sure why the men like him, not unless it makes the men feel more macho because Bill's so much of a sado. But anyway, that's my Dundee crime series. But I also write the historical murder mysteries. Now, I think my heart is in the historical ones. And I've got this character, Kirsty Campbell. Now, Kirsty Campbell is a pioneer policewoman. Sorry, I've got an itchy nose. Kirsty Campbell is a pioneer policewoman. She joined the police force in London in 1914 when the first women's police services were set up. Now, I don't know if a lot of you know this, but the first women's police services were set up by the suffragette societies. So a lot of the early policewomen had been suffragettes. So Kirsty is an ex-suffragette and now a policewoman. Book one of the series is The Death Game. Let me see. Oh, I forgot to say that although Kirsty joins the police force in London, she is actually a broughty fairy lass. She is estranged from her family, has been for the past 10 years, and the reason why will come out in the book. So in the first chapter of The Death Game, she is called to a meeting with her superior, and who is accompanied by the Dundee City Police Superintendent. She is seconded to Dundee as Dundee's first policewoman. Now, when I was doing my research into my articles, I discovered there was a policewoman in Dundee in 1919. She was a Mrs. Thompson. She was there for until about 1921, and then she vanishes. I don't know where she goes after that, because Dundee police, I don't think, really looked on her as a policewoman. But she was a policewoman because she was questioned in one of the governmental reports as a policewoman and listed as a policewoman. But when you look at research in Dundee by the police, they call her a police matron and things like that, when she was actually a policewoman. So the fact that there was a policewoman in Dundee in 1990 inspired me to create Kirsty Campbell. Kirsty Campbell's not Mrs. Thompson. Mrs. Thompson was a middle-aged lady, quite staid and polite, and you know, all the rest. That just actually knows it's getting on my nerves. So Kirsty is somebody entirely different. She's feistier. She's about 29, coming up for 30 at the time of The Death Game was written. And she arrives in Dundee as the city's only policewoman, and you can imagine what her reception's like. I mean, the Dundee police don't want her. So she gets involved in a series of murders. Now, these are kind of ritual murders, so the book has a kind of a gothic theme. Maybe if I read you a chapter, let me see if I can find it. Oh. Right, this is a very short bit about, this is The Death Game, remember, a very short bit when the body is discovered. The body is discovered in the Howth graveyard, and Kirsty's not in this scene. Thoughts of witches and banshees raced through the young constable's mind as he ran through the dark cemetery in the direction of the screams. His lantern swung wildly, splashing light indiscriminately in front of him, illuminating trees, bushes, and gravestones. The unearthly sound of the screaming grew louder, and he dreaded what he was going to find. He swore softly under his breath, cursing the gent who had reported the screaming, and cursing his partner for not being with him. It had not seemed to matter when he had agreed to cover the beat on his own, to give Harry time off with one of the Overgate girls, but now he bitterly regretted it. A movement over to his left was caught briefly in the wavering beam, and he turned, raising his lantern higher. The light flickered over a macabre tableau. The girl was crouched over something on the top of a flat. The girl was crouched over something on the flat top of a gravestone. She pushed herself upwards, stopped screaming, and stared towards the light with glazed eyes. Her white gown was saturated with something dark. The same dark liquid dribbled down the knife she held, and in the silence, he could hear the drips plop onto the body, spread-eagled on the gravestone. He took 2 steps backward, fumbled for his whistle, and raised it to his lips with shaking fingers, and blasted on it for all he was worth. Well, that's just a taste of The Death Game. It's quite a popular book, and it's possible you might like it. Oh, by the way, I don't write my historical books in a very dry historical manner. I don't use modern language, but I don't write them in an archaic fashion either. So basically I write them the same way as I write my contemporary books. So don't be frightened to pick up a historical one. Right, now, book 2 in the series, which was published after The Death Game. It could actually be considered book 1 because it's set 2 years earlier than The Death Game. It's Devil's Porridge. Now, do you know what Devil's Porridge is? Devil's Porridge is a mixture of nitroglycerine and gun cotton, and the munitionettes at Gretna kneaded it in lead tubs with their bare hands, like kneading a loaf of dough, and it turned into a kind of a porridgey consistency. And it was Arthur Conan Doyle who called it devil's porridge when he wrote an article for one of the local papers at the end of 1916. He talked about the munitionettes mixing their devil's porridge. I thought that was a brilliant title for a book, which is why I stole it. But devil's porridge, anyway, set in Gretna, the munitions factory in town. Gretna Township was never there before the First World War. People mix it up with Gretna Green. It's not Gretna Green, it's Gretna Township. And they built the munitions factory and the town between 1916 and 1917. There were 30,000 people working at Gretna at one point, and loads of munitionettes. Now, the Ministry of War contacted Women's Police Services, and they contracted for 159 policewomen to patrol Gretna. They were the sorry, I can't get my tongue around that. The munitionettes referred to them as the lady police, and they were there. They were there to search them and to protect the munitionettes' morals, because Gretna town at that time, it had everything that a town could need. In fact, it had, it had shops, it had cinemas, it had dance halls, bowling greens, tennis courts, football grounds, you name it, they had it. They had their own hospitals, laundries, restaurants, everything. In fact, some of the goods in the shops on sale in Gretna, you couldn't get them in London because they wanted to keep the munitionettes happy. So my book is set in Gretna. It starts off in London with a big explosion, a munitions factory explosion, and Kirsty is there at that point, and then she's sent to Gretna. There are a lot of people go to Gretna at that time. I mean, I've got Irish revolutionaries in this book. I've got German spy. I've got a girl who was a friend of the girl who was murdered in London. They are all going to Gretna. And I got them in Euston Station at one point to take them to Gretna. And my friend, Wendy, she phoned me and says, "How are you getting on with the book?" And I says, "Getting on fine, but I've got them all at Euston Station. I can't get them out." Nevertheless, I did get them out and I got them all to Gretna, and further murders took place, of course. But I've also got a plot to kill the king, who visited Gretna in May of 1917. This book's set in 1917, by the way, 2 years earlier than the death came, which is why I say it could easily be book one. So there's lots going on in this book, and a lot of people like it. And one thing that arose because I wrote this book was something very, very exciting. I was invited to take part in Secret Scotland with Susan Calman to talk about Devil's Porridge. Not the book, but the explosive. So I went down there. It was just after lockdown was lifted in July. And I went down shaking in my shoes because of Gretna was a hotspot at that time. The borders were a hotspot. And I went down, had to stay overnight in a hotel, and we filmed the next day at Eastriggs, which is about, I think, 5 miles from Gretna. And well, Susan Calman was lovely. She was absolutely brilliant. So we did the filming there. It was screened about 2 to 3 weeks ago, I think. If you're looking for it, it's series 3, episode 4, Galloway and the Borders. And that was really exciting. Being on TV, a telly star, with Susan Calman. And Susan Calman, I've loved for years. I watched her on Strictly Come Dancing a few years ago, and she captivated me at that point. So to actually be on TV with her was brilliant. Anyway, I better not speak about Devil's Porridge too much, because you won't want to read the book if I tell you too much about it. So that's Devil's Porridge. Anyway, the third book in the Kirsty Campbell series is death of a doxy. Now, death of a doxy, Kirsty's back in Dundee, it's 1919 again, and she's investigating a murder of Lily, who is one of Big Aggie's girls in her house of pleasure. So I take it you know what a doxy is. A doxy is a woman of the night, a good time girl, you know. Polite names for them. But Lily is one of those, and she is murdered. So Kirsty is on the trail. Her boss, Jimmy Brewster, he believes that Big Aggie murdered Lily because she's the one who found the body and is covered in her blood. And everyone else thinks Big Aggie did it, but Kirsty's not so sure. So she starts to unravel Lily's secrets, and she gets on the trail of the real killer. Now, this killer will stop at nothing to prevent his identity being found out. So Kirsty puts herself in a fair bit of danger. So that's death of a doxy. Now, so since then, I mean, that's my three. I do like Kirsty. I think you've gathered by now, I do like my Kirsty character. So my new series, I've started a new series. Now, I've only got one book in it so far, and that's Dangerous Destiny. Now, Dangerous Destiny is set in 1908, which is earlier than the Kirsty Campbell Mysteries. And I have Kirsty in it, but she's a very young Kirsty. She's 18, and she is struggling to free herself from her family. Kirsty comes from a very middle-class family. They have expectations for her. She's also got a secret, which I'm not telling you at the moment. You might really want to read the book to find out. But Kirsty comes from this middle-class family. Her father's a mill owner. They live in a big mansion in Broughty Ferry. And her parents are quite strict in a sense, in that they want her to, they want to protect her. They don't want to give her any freedom. They have her life planned out. What they want for her is to marry some nice man at some point, you know, the usual expectations for young women in 1908. But Kirsty doesn't want any of this, and she's becoming quite rebellious. So against her father's permission, advice, she goes to attend, I forgot, to attend a meeting in Dundee. Winston Churchill is at this meeting and he's talking and she wants to hear him. So, as I say, she manages to get free and have a day in Dundee, and she is going to this meeting. Now, I'll read you a wee bit of, you know, she's been in the meeting, she's been befriended by Martha. There are three suffragettes in this one. Now, I've got a seasoned suffragette, Martha, who is a wee bit older than Kirsty. Then I have Ethel, who's the same age as Kirsty. She is a working class girl, a mill girl, and she comes from an abusive background, whereas Kirsty comes from a middle class background. And the three of them team up to try to discover who is murdering suffragettes in Dundee. Now, these suffragettes are being found with their suffragette banners, their scarves, tied round their neck and strangled. The police aren't interested. I mean, basically, you know, to them, suffragettes are just, you know, well, you know, it's good riddance to bad rubbish kind of attitude. So they're not really interested. So Kirsty, Martha, and Ethel team up and try to find out who the killer is. And of course, in this one, Martha takes a fair bit of lead, and she comes near to death at one point in the book. So I'll read a wee bit about Kirsty's introduction to suffragettes, because at the start of the book, Kirsty's not a suffragette. Ethel is just starting to get involved, and Martha, as I said, is a seasoned suffragette. So here's Kirsty's introduction to suffragettes. After she'd been in the meeting, and the girl, the woman who sat beside her in the meeting was Martha, and Martha had been ejected. So this is after the ejection. After watching how the stewards had treated her new friend, Kirsty cowered back in her seat for fear they would return and manhandle her. It had been her own stubbornness that brought her to this meeting. A petty defiance because her father ridiculed her and forbade her to attend. If it hadn't been for that, and her genuine interest in the speaker, she wouldn't have been tempted to come. When she arrived, it had been confusing and not the orderly affair she'd thought it would be, and Martha had helped her find a seat. The young woman had been polite, helpful, kind, and not any different from Kirsty herself. Kirsty had taken to her and thought she seemed nice. Kirsty couldn't understand it. It wasn't as if Martha had done anything awful. She had only asked a question. And even though men didn't like women questioning them, Kirsty could see no reason for the rough treatment meted out. Recalling the steward's hands on Martha's breasts brought back memories of her own ordeal, and she started to worry what might happen to her new friend outside the hall. I should have helped her, Kirsty thought. Instead, I sat here like the mouse I am and did nothing. But it wasn't too late. Sighing at her own stupidity for not minding her own business, she snatched the abandoned hat and parasol from the floor and squeezed her way out of the row of seats before hurrying for the exit. Clustered in small groups outside were several women in varying degrees of dishevelment, all of them ejected from the hall. She soon spotted Martha conversing with a tall woman, older than herself. Kirsty hesitated, not wishing to interrupt, but she had rescued Martha's hat and parasol and wanted to return them to her. Martha saw her coming and turned to her with a smile. "Kirsty, isn't it? Did you get thrown out as well?" Kirsty handed her the hat. "No, I'm afraid I didn't," she apologised. Although why she should feel apologetic, she didn't know. Maybe it was because Martha took so much pride in her ejection. "You lost your hat and parasol," she mumbled. "I thought you'd need them." "That is exceedingly kind of you, isn't it, Helen? Few people would rescue a suffragette's bonnet." She took the hat from Kirsty and tucked her curls underneath until she looked presentable. Kirsty swallowed. What a fool not to have realised Sorry, I'll start that again. Kirsty swallowed. What a fool not to have realised Martha was a suffragette, one of the women her father talked about so disparagingly. But Martha wasn't an ogre or a woman pretending to be a man. She was just an ordinary woman like Kirsty. The only other time Kirsty had met a suffragette had been at the Albert Square meeting the previous Saturday. Curiosity got the better of her. What is it suffragettes do, apart from getting thrown out of meetings? She laughed self-consciously. "It would take a long time to explain," Martha said, "although the main aim is to fight for women to have a vote." What good would that do? Kirsty had never felt any need to vote, thinking politics beyond her intellect. "It would give women more independence. We'd have a right to say who represented us in Parliament, and we'd make sure we voted for people who would stand up for women and give them a say in their own lives. Men wouldn't be able to control us in the way they've always done." Martha paused for breath. "If you're interested, come to our meeting at the Mathers Hotel on Sunday afternoon. Here, I'll write the address for you." Martha scrabbled in her bag for a pencil and wrote the details on the back of a leaflet. The thought of independence intrigued Kirsty, fueling her newly aroused rebellious feelings. "Thank you," she said. "I'll try to be there." She scurried off, eager to get home, but feeling more alive than she'd felt for a long time. Well, that's Dangerous Destiny, and that's a wee introduction of how Kirsty gets introduced to the suffragette cause. I mean, this book is quite new. I published it this year, and it was published in March, just as lockdown started. So the book hasn't had a very good start in life, and basically none of the bookshops locally have it in stock, although you can get it on Amazon. All my books are available in paperback and ebook, so you'd have to go to Amazon for the ebooks, of course. But I have sold quite a few of these. I've sold some on Amazon. I've also sold some at home over the doorstep. And if you do want to buy a copy of any of my books, I'm quite happy to sell over the doorstep if you live quite locally. Signed copies, of course, or I could post them out. You just have to contact me on Facebook and I'd be happy to do that. So private message on Facebook, that's the way to go. Okay, so anyway, it's been really nice talking to you today. It's really quite strange though, talking to a computer instead of talking to you face to face. And I'm finding that quite odd. I like to meet people. So basically, I hope we do meet up again before too long. I hope these lockdowns don't take forever, although the way they're going, you just don't know. But probably by next year I'll be coming out and about and we can meet up again. In the meantime, I've told you all about my books. At this stage in talk, I would probably say, have you any questions and what would you like to know about any of the books or about how I wrote them or anything like that. But unfortunately, because of the way things are, I can't do that. But if you pop onto Facebook and maybe ask me there, I'm sure when this video goes up in the library Facebook page, there'll be a space for comments underneath, so you can stick comments under there and ask me questions there, or ask me questions on my own Facebook page. I'll be happy to answer anything you want to know. In the meantime, it's been lovely talking to you. So it's goodbye for now, and hope to meet you in the future. Bye bye.